We are here. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to the September Save Our Indian River Lagoon Half-Cent Sales Tax Oversight Committee. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, hope everybody has had a good month so far. Just want to share, I think it was 3 or 4 days ago, was going over the 192 Causeway and saw so many groups of bait fish, and something was chasing them. It wasn't me. I was driving, but something was in the water chasing them, and I have not seen that many separate groups of bait fish in a long time. And so we still have a long way to go, and we know that. But the signs are there if you take a look at the lagoon, and it's beautiful. And Commissioner Smith sends us pictures almost every morning on Facebook. So if you aren't his friend, add him, and you'll get some lovely inspirational pictures. All right. So we'll go ahead and do a roll call. Jackie?
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Lorraine Koss. Here. Charles Venuto.
Here.
Vinnie Toronto.
Here.
Don is not here. John Windsor.
Here.
Terry Casto.
Here.
Bobby Putnam.
Here.
Laura Lee Thompson.
Here.
Stephanie Ely. Here. Kimberly is not here yet. Todd is not here yet. Kurt Smith.
Here.
Barbara Wall-Scanlon. Here. And Eric Manis.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum.
All right. Thank you, Jackie. Okay, the first thing is the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any public comment? All right, we'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, passes unanimously. The next thing is the approval of the minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we've got motions in 3 seconds. Any discussion from the committee? Any public comment? All right, we'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, passes unanimously. All right, now let's get into the meat and potatoes. Progress and fiscal reports. Virginia.
Good morning.
Morning.
All right, starting with leaky laterals, we had one more code case wrap up. So we have 18 remaining cases still going through compliance. But, 95, 97% or whatever have been fixed so far. Quick connects, we had 18 more individual homeowners connect to sewer, 29 more individual homeowners upgrade their septic systems. We've completed 2 more project videos, the Turkey Creek offshore oyster restoration project you'll see today, and then we're saving the Seagrass restoration experimental design for next month because the focus of that meeting is going to be on seagrass restoration, so we'll hang on to that. Derelict vessels, we finished the contract early this year, and so we got a little bit of a gap before the new contract starts October 1st. And there's some changes underway with the state's grant program to try to make those funds available as block grants, which would mean that we could apply for sort of the typical amount of money that we normally spend and have it on hand, ready to go as soon as the derelict vessel is cleared, rather than having to wait till we have a list of cleared vessels and then apply for state money and then contract and then, so hopefully things will move faster in the coming years. For South Central C, septic to sewer, we're now up to 93 of the 150 homeowners connected. And actually, I just signed off on 15 more last night, so that number should be going up rapidly. South Beaches A, we have 5 connection agreements executed and 9 more in process. This was the area where it was not practical, not feasible to put in the gravity line adjacent to the existing force main, so we're trying to voluntarily get people to connect to the existing force main. So we've been doing a hard press on the community. We did a letter, we did a postcard, we've done door hangers, we have talked to a few of the residents that we have phone numbers for, and they're talking to their neighbors, and we've got a couple contractors that are going door to door, gate to gate, as the case may be. So we're really doing our best to try to make that happen voluntarily. And then with the MICO sewer line extension, we're still in the final stages of touching up the as-built and getting FDOT and FDEP sign off that that line is good to go so that we can start connecting people to it. We have 3 septic sewer projects. Sykes Creek, M, N, and T are all out to bid as a single bid package, trying to get some economies of scale there. It should open in about 2.5 weeks' time. We have one stormwater project, West Arlington, that was awarded to Joe Bear Contracting, so that should get break ground here shortly. And we have 2 stormwater projects that are out to bid, Pioneer and Flamingo. We're getting a lot of questions about the Titusville Causeway Multi-Trophic Restoration and Living Shoreline Resiliency Project, because there are the wave attenuation devices. There are a bunch of them that are staged along the causeway, and then there are many, many more that are being constructed at an old strip mall site, and so they're very visible, and people are calling to say, what the heck is that? But over 190 of those have been poured of the 660 something total that are going to be going into the water. So they expect to finish pouring those around late October, and so hopefully they'll be going into the water before the end of the calendar year. Then a couple things that weren't on here. Just wanted to remind folks that funding applications for the 2025 plan update, those are due next Friday, September 27th. And the COC structural changes that you recommended last month, those are going to be going to public hearing for the County Commission on October 8th. And folks who are League of Cities representatives that want to continue, that aren't term limited, Laura Lee, Eric, Dawn's not here. I'm trying to get those to the League of Cities October 14th meeting. And they wanted all the materials October 3rd. So if you have any updates, if you want to make any updates to your experience, qualifications, whatever, please get those to us. So then on presentations this month, I kept a few dates from last month because we had such a full agenda. I didn't talk about this, but Brevard Zoo did a new event this year called Science Sundays. They were most Sundays during the months of July and August, and we saw hundreds of people that way that we would not have normally gotten to do. They set up a number of booths inside the lodge so people could come into the air conditioning for a few minutes and cool off and learn some more about critters and the environment and what was going on. And so Brandon worked a few of those events, and Aaliyah and Abby and we all sort of swapped off. Abby showed up and the lodge was all locked up, and she was trying to figure out what was, for whatever reason, there was not a Science Sunday that Sunday, but they took pity on her and they said, here, you can set up next to the bonsai exhibit. And so she caught everybody doing the circuit through the zoo and had a great day just without air conditioning. Kurt Smith and I did a radio interview on the Bill Mick Show at WWMB. I think went really well. I appreciate being able to do that with a COC member. And Brandon worked at Cocoa Beach Lutheran Church Lagoon event. This was in collaboration with the Indian River Lagoon Coalition and the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. So they did several presentations, and then they had boats and took people out on the lagoon to actually see the lagoon. And so the three different agencies dispersed themselves on the boats to be able to answer questions. And that was also a different way to reach a different audience than we usually have access to. Yesterday, Fred Goldstein did an interview of me for his Explore the Lagoon episodes, and I know a few of you have done those, so I'm looking forward to seeing how that went. And then this weekend is the International Coastal Cleanup. And so there are loads of groups and places that you can participate in the International Coastal Cleanup. And Brandon's got links in the thing here for anybody that wants to sign up. So as I said before, we're going to talk about seagrass trends next month. And we also have the National Estuary Program coming to talk about the $9.4 million of funding awarded from NOAA for restoration and building that community of practice for restoration in the lagoon. And then in November, in addition to that being when the applications come in, and you'll be sorting through those funding applications, we're going to have a presentation on derelict vessel mooring issues and potential solutions. December, you normally have the month off so that you can review the draft plan. And then January, you'll have the draft plan to review. So just a quick reminder of what's coming. And then depending on what you want to do, you can have a last meeting in February or not. Sometimes we've canceled that February meeting, and March will be the new, if everything goes to plan, new members. So that's my report.
All right.
Chair.
Thank you so much for all that work. There are two people I just want to thank, Sandra and Les Vale. So I met them earlier this year. There's a program called Brevard Insight, and it's where new members of the community are put on a bus and traveled throughout the county to see different areas. And I was fortunate enough to work with MJ Waters to do a presentation. And Sandra and Les just moved here from New Jersey. They are both so excited about the lagoon. And in their HOA, they have been talking about Florida natives, and they've been talking about lining the sewer pipes and why it's important. And so I wanted to thank them and just remind us all that lagoon education is one of those problems that never stops. Because as we are a state that is paradise, we live where people vacation to, we need to make sure that the education continues. So that was just a good example. I was it felt really good to have somebody thank me for that. But all I did is light the fire inside them to better their community and their environment. So thank you, Virginia, for the work that you do, and everybody else on the committee, the work you do out in the community. All right, we'll go with the monthly revenue graph and financial statements. Hi, Molly.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
So for June, we received 4.7 million in collections and 3.6 million for the quarterly discretionary. So that's 8.3 total. And now we're at 409 million for the program. And the monthly financial statement for revenues, we are at 418 million for the budget, and for total assigned, we're at 372 million. We received 3.8 million in federal grants revenue, and maybe $1 million in state grant revenue. So we're still working on those reimbursements. And then For expenditures, total assigned, we are at almost 68 million. And for the actuals, we're at 18 million. Any questions?
All right. Anybody have any questions for Molly? Okay, Molly,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go ahead and move into our other reports and special presentations. Our first one today is going to be managing pollutant loads from stormwater. Mark Nelson. Good morning, Mark.
Morning.
Back up, right? I can start at the end.
Let's work our way back.
All right. Yes, so my name is Mark Nelson. I'm with Jones Edmonds. Talk a little bit about managing stormwater here. So kind of starting out, how did we get here in terms of stormwater in the Indian River Lagoon? Provide a lot of examples of this, but, there's just, initially, it was a large expansion of the contributing area and flows, to the lagoon via the canals that were cut historically, over 50 years ago. And a lot of that untreated water, untreated stormwater was prior to statewide stormwater rules. And that undertreated stormwater, even after stormwater rules were put in place. And so, it's hard to put that toothpaste back in the bottle. So this image here is what I would call a LiDAR image, or it's really an elevation map of kind of like Brevard County area. And that white area is essentially the ridge at about a little higher than, or right around elevation 30. And you can kind of see, really it helps graphically depict that ridge that used to send water generally to the west out to the upper St. Johns River, and then to the east to the lagoon. And it's, I think, a really important depiction that kind of grabbed our eyes many, many years ago when we started looking at improvement projects for the lagoon, is how to kind of redirect those waters and send them back to the west historically where they were. This is kind of a more specific example of the contributing drainage basin to the M1 canal. That blue highlighted area is the historic drainage basin, essentially that used to go west and now goes really east through M1 canal. And that kind of gives you some context for how much additional area for one specific project example of the flows that are now going east that used to go west. Another way to look at this, and again, apologize for the technical details of this, but on the left side is west about I-95, and the right side is east about just past Evans Road, getting towards the intercoastal on US 1. But you can kind of see this cross section was cut kind of parallel to or right along M1 canal, and so you can kind of see, as you get down between Wickham Road and Evans Road, that high point. Yet, that you can see also that canal at the bottom there. That's the bottom of the canal at elevation 12 that was cut through there, and how that's redirecting water from the west to the east through the M1 canal. And I'll talk more specifically about the M1 Canal Crane Creek project that we're doing here in a little bit, but that's just a good example of helping understand why we're getting these significant stormwater flows that are coming from an area that used to not drain that way. Additionally, on the stormwater treatment side, back in '81 was when the state first adopted stormwater rules, and the first in the nation. Now, Brevard County preceded that by a few years with their own set of stormwater rules, but it wasn't until 1981 that we really adopted the presumptive criteria for treating stormwater. Unfortunately, as we've learned over the decades, and what this graph shows is kind of the removal efficiency of a traditional stormwater treatment pond. And so what we've seen over the years is that presumptive criteria of treating like 1 inch over a drainage basin, of improved drainage basin, or 2.5 inches of rainfall over the impervious area, and that size is your stormwater pond and drives all this presumptive criteria. We were only generally getting roughly 40% nitrogen removal efficiencies through all these stormwater treatment ponds that are prolific throughout your county. And so, it creates real challenges for how you come, overcome that and do better. So Senate Bill 712 in 2021, the Clean Waterways Act, not the Clean Water Act, but the Clean Waterways Act was adopted, and it wrapped up a whole lot of different environmental improvement legislation, from reclaimed water, septic to sewer, some stuff related to FDACs, but it also included, statewide stormwater rule had been moving in parallel to this, and it really pushed it along and helped adopt the statewide stormwater rule. There was a technical advisory committee from which a number of folks within this room and Brevard County and other stormwater utilities participated to help give feedback and help drive that along. But that was adopted and is now in place and has a much higher treatment criteria. So future development is treated at a much higher level. Redevelopment is required to be treated. It also pushes local governments to really step up their O&M on those ponds, because that has been lax over the years. Entities that have stormwater ponds, they weren't necessarily enforced in terms of doing that operations and maintenance to make sure they're functioning as they're supposed to. And it also expanded a lot of the treatment options. I mean, the traditional stormwater treatment pond is now not the only tool in the toolbox. As a matter of fact, it's an inadequate tool to address development. And so now we're seeing treatment trains of bioswales and other things preceding stormwater ponds, and then stormwater ponds that have other things incorporated in them. And that's really has to be done in order to achieve the greater than 80% reduction requirements for, or post versus pre-development load requirements of the statewide stormwater rule. So a lot of folks are really just starting to grapple with what that means and how they're going to do projects, because now it's requiring more cost associated with those projects, but it's also achieving generally a net zero impact in terms of additional treatment loads or additional treatment. So again, going back to this project, I mean, this is a project we'll talk about in a little bit, but yeah, this is an example of a really large scale project that had pretty significant cost in order to redirect these flows. What we're faced with is, again, here's a great project that we did with Brevard County at a much smaller scale, but it's going to take hundreds of projects at this scale to achieve what you can accomplish with some of these larger scale projects. And these are retrofits that aren't necessarily even driven by rule. They're just being good stewards trying to get additional load reductions. So that's kind of the gist of my presentation, and just to kind of seed some thoughts in terms of how we got here. And from here I have another presentation on our feasibility study for the Indian River Lagoon.
All right, thank you, Mark. Virginia, yes.
Mark, can you point out the canals? They're sort of named there west of the White Ridge.
Yep.
Just to explain
Like,
that they're cutting through and draining to the lagoon.
yeah, well, I mean, you've got, the specific names, or just
No, just illustrate.
walk over it.
Yeah.
You can see all these canals. This is what, C1 right here, I think. And then, all these canals that are cutting through this high spots you can see them, the dark spots are all the lower elevations that are cutting through this high ridge. It's around elevation 30.
And so for those at home, what was said was the bottom green one was C1, and then there are other canals east to west cutting through the ridge. Sorry, Mark, the microphone doesn't travel with you. I wish it did.
Okay.
And I'm sure Logan does too. All right, so thank you. I know Lorraine had a question. Lorraine?
Yeah, so when is the deadline for actually, so we have a real boom in development right now in Brevard County. All these plans are being submitted. When do they have to include plans that you're basically doubling the removal of nitrogen? When does that have to take place? When will we see that?
You want to talk to the grandfathering rule? I was afraid I was going to hit on that, because there's a lot of,
Yeah.
ands, and buts to the
Right,
grandfathering rule of the
right. So
statewide stormwater
the
rule.
increased nutrient requirements, there was an 18-month delay for when those kick in. So it's 2025. I'm not,
So like January 1? No.
no, I can't
Would be
remember whether it's July 1 or
December.
December 3rd. Anyway, there's,
A lot of the larger developments, if they had conceptual permit applications, which if they were savvy, financially speaking, they would have, tried to game, I hate to say game the system, but they would have worked hard to try to not have to comply because it's challenging. It requires more land area and more costs for folks to achieve these requirements. So
Right.
if, you-
but the
So-
O&M rules are already
Yep.
effective.
Mhm.
And there was something else that was, I think you have to use the new rainfall.
yep.
Yeah.
The
So-
new estimated rainfall for the calculations? Well, so the conceptual permit application, so anyone that has a conceptual permit application approved by St. John's
Is the
before
generally
December
is
of
grandfathered into the old
25
rules.
is so, because there seems to be a rush.
Yep. I probably said too much already, so I'll just,
Yeah,
Yes.
there was the draft rules that DEP adopted, and then there was the legislative ratification process. So during that legislative ratification process, in order to get the support, to get the bill passed, right, to get the rules adopted, there were an assortment of grandfathering clauses that were added, right? That's that making of sausage process.
Okay. And then on the O&M, so that is also, what's the extent of that reduction? Because you say greater than 80% nitrogen removal. Currently,
the O and M
Stormwater
is not
pond.
necessary, that's more, for example, for local governments
Okay.
to then, in times past, there was, I guess, the district's enforcement of compliance was, I wouldn't say lax, it was not stiff, and so now the O and M requirements in that statewide stormwater rule are encouraging local governments to comply with it and get out there and inspect their stormwater systems and ensure that they're compliant with their permits. It does not require them to go to the new statewide stormwater rule criteria. It just requires them to get out there and make sure they're maintaining their systems annually. So now,
Okay.
local governments have always generally had that responsibility. It just wasn't always necessarily strictly enforced.
So additionally, like Mark said, you're not going to be able to get there with just a pond anymore. You're going to have to have a whole treatment train. And so, how do you actually operate and maintain that whole treatment train, this new technology that people are unfamiliar with? And so as engineers design projects going forward, they have to develop an operation and maintenance plan. This is how you operate and maintain this treatment train. And that has to be approved by DEP or St. John's as part of the permitting process. They also have to show how it is that they have a funding stream, into the future to fund that operation and maintenance. So all of that, I believe, is effective already. But the
that's
new rules
effective already. Okay,
don't kick in.
because the
Oh, I know what the
plans I'm
interim
seeing
was.
don't have any money budgeted for stormwater, in terms of these ponds, developments that are coming forward. So, okay.
There are also a requirement for inspections every 2 years, but there isn't a cadre of trained inspectors out there yet. So there was a 12-month delay for the state to develop and offer training courses to create this, force of trained inspectors to provide that service to communities statewide.
All right.
Okay.
Laura Lee, did you have a question?
Thank you. Can you go back to the slide before this one, please? So can you explain, so they did retrofitting to that pond.
Mhm.
What did they do? How is it gonna work? How is that gonna reduce the nutrients?
Do you know the system as well? I know it reasonably well. This is what, south of Pineda Causeway. And it was a stormwater pond that was retrofitted. It has a little solar array that runs a little pump that is then taking storm water that's already in that pond and putting it through a treatment train of, what they call a BAM or activated media, and then it goes back into the pond. So it's taking the existing water in the pond running it from a pump through a BAM-like media that then helps denitrify that water. Is that
So is the media under that rocks where the little blue pump-looking thing is? Okay. Does this pond like overflow and end up going to the Indian River, or does the water just sit there all the time with that one?
I think all the ponds are generally going to overflow and go to the Indian River Lagoon. There's very few that don't. And so this was not a required project. It was a project the county took on to try to, generate, load reduction.
All right. Bobby?
Yeah. So I was gonna, the treatment trains, could we get a little more explanation to the depth of those and the options or the mandates or examples other than this? Because I'm also thinking again back to what they have at the A's Park in Palm Bay going into Turkey Creek, and this is way before any of those mandates or anything where the stormwater pond overflows into
That's the way.
the swale that's weird and tiered, but they don't do anything else to it, and that notably reduced the load well before any mandates. Is there other simpler options? Do they have? How specific does it get? Could someone say, hey, we have these ideas and we could try that out? Also,
Well, I mean, you're going to have to go through there's a BMP trains software that they're generally using to demonstrate that load reduction. And so there are a whole host of different I hate to say skin the cat, but different ways to accomplish it. And there's no one solution, but I can tell you the traditional runoff into a stormwater pond, treating the first, X percentage and then discharging does not accomplish it anymore. Like we said, that's 40-50%, and you're going to have to get upwards of 80-90% pre versus post to be able to get a system. And so in those scenarios, a lot of times, what folks are trying to do is they're putting them into shallow swales that have check blocks in them that capture that first little bit of runoff and percolate it before it gets into the pond. Then once it's in the pond, then they still might be using BAM or some other kind of treatment train, wetland treatment trains and other things. I mean, there's a whole host of different ways to accomplish it, and it depends on, we're really going to see a lot of different things coming from a lot of different folks, and there's
So in the plan, there's a table of different kinds of stormwater best management practices and what the nutrient removal credit is for those. The BMP trains that Mark mentioned is, each of those is,
deductive.
you can't say this one's 10% and this one's 15% and this one's 40% and that adds up,
it
because if you took 15% out at the first step, then there's only 85 left. So if you do 40% on that, it's 40% of 85, not 40 in addition. So, mathematically, you've got to take each one, subtract that out, see what's left going to the next phase. What's the nutrient removal efficiency of that next phase, do that calculation, then the third phase. So there are all the projects that are listed in the plan, and then the state is, actively seeking new technologies, and as those are submitted and tested in the state of Florida and approved for use, the state is establishing a library of what those best management practices are and what the nutrient removal effectiveness is that engineers should plug into their equations to design projects going forward. But, baffle boxes you're familiar with,
Yeah.
floating islands, in addition to.
Would it include like Malabar Park, the community park has, and it wasn't done for any of this, it was done for the fish. They have an area that's a shallow area when they built their pond for the park, to keep a shallow area for, so it's a seasonal wetland. Because some years it's totally dry and other, if you look at it from above, it looks like a bluefish, and that's the top dorsal fin area. Would that also be included into that? Or would that be too difficult to separate because it's in the pond?
There's wetland polishing.
So they could also do some, which would also enhance the native local. Okay.
But again, just to clarify, I mean, retroactively, no one's required to do anything. Only moving forward for new development or redevelopment, and even then the grandfathering rules for when you whether you have a conceptual permit. But it's certainly going to help, and it's a great step forward because, like I said, going back here, I mean, we've had years of decades of getting no better than 40-45% reduction. So we were always losing, regardless.
But
Charles?
we,
Yes,
Go ahead, Virginia.
I was going to say, it sounds like the rules are not so much prescriptive, but are really performance-based.
Yes, sir.
I'll just add, we do have the total maximum daily load requirements for local governments to achieve load reductions. And so looking at our existing stormwater facilities and how to incorporate additional BMPs to make them more efficient is, one way to try to reach those load reduction targets.
And so the redevelopment, do they have the same standards as new development? Or is there more room to play because it would be maybe
Yeah.
difficult?
Yeah, I think it's 55%
Yeah,
for
it's
redevelopment instead of the 80%. Because if you required the same percent reduction for redevelopment, you would discourage redevelopment in those downtown areas and promote urban sprawl.
Some of the older spots would have I think a lot of unique difficulties possible.
Correct.
Even here, which we don't have a lot of the older areas.
But there's also a regional stormwater treatment option for them to, partner with others and build treatment off-site, direct their stormwater to off-site treatment.
Sort of trading, so to speak, in a sense.
Okay, Laura Lee and then Kimberly.
Well, he answered my question already. I was going to ask whether existing facilities would be required to be improved, but it doesn't sound like they are.
Kimberly.
Thank you for your presentation. Could you tell us who is Jones Edmonds? What do you do?
Sure, can I do that in the next, I realize I have that in the next
Yeah, absolutely.
presentation.
My question, though, is with all of these, I'm all for low-impact development. I love the concept. I love that this is written into specs for the engineers. Is there any consideration towards the slowing of the drainage? Is that in the specs? You mentioned the software. Is that accessible to anyone? As more developments come along with new technology, is there a place to access those options that the engineers have to put that train together? And what, or if any consideration has been given to drainage time? Because, with flooding, it's increased everywhere across the state, obviously. Rainfalls are more concentrated.
Okay, there's a lot
So,
wrapped
Mark,
up in
real
that
quick to
question.
add-
That is, so is
Well,
there,
to add on to
the
that-
question is specifically, is there consideration that you know of right now for drainage time? in
Retention
these-
time, slowing down. I mean, that is a trick of the trade, so to speak, going back to, one of the prior slides. But you can see how detention time, there's a diminishing return in traditional detention ponds for that, but that's in a traditional wet detention pond. But if you can slow it down within, say, by capturing that first inch and going through bioswales and other things like that, then there certainly is advantages to longer retention times.
And I think, Kimberly, to your point, I think a lot of this nutrient removal that you've shown and has been focused on has been the nitrogen and phosphorus. But what we've learned is that fresh water in itself, especially splashes and storms, can be a form of pollutant. In other words, and damaging the environment or the water. And so I think to Kimberly's point, if it was slowed down, that is one of the tenets of low impact development, which lessens the amount of splash of fresh water you're getting, which upsets the balance. So I know that detention time curve was based on nitrogen removal, but is the state at all, and this is going to be my question, sorry Kimberly, and please
No, that's okay.
speak on it. My question was going to be, is the state at all looking at any sort of requirements, I think as Stephanie is referring to, which would slow down, or Kimberly, sorry, which would slow down the water, limiting the amount of fresh water that is going into the lagoon. But please, Kimberly.
Well, even more than the salinity issue, like outside of the lagoon specifically, or any brackish areas, just retention. So if you're putting a new development next to somewhere that doesn't already have adequate drainage, is the slowing of that stormwater, is there being considerations made for those existing stormwater drainage components? So where flooding is,
Or
it's causing flooding in certain areas where new development has gone in, pervious,
Right.
impervious, different issues for that. So with additional measures implemented, which I am all for, just side point, is there any consideration being made for existing drainage in those grandfathered new developments and old 40-year-old, 50-year-old developments that already exist?
to ensure no adverse offsite impacts in
Correct.
terms of flooding impacts?
Correct.
Well, that is generally the role of the district and the environmental resource permitting, but as we've seen, a lot of times local governments will take it one step beyond that to do their own development review of drainage calcs to ensure no adverse offsite impacts. And so I can't speak to whether or not, to what extent Brevard County does that as part of the development review process, but it's very common for local governments to look at those to help ensure that they're not causing any additional peak stages in the neighboring communities.
That is best case scenario, and I'm not sure what Brevard does specifically, but is there any requirement that you know of built into this legislation
Well,
for that?
it's always been in the existing rules no pre versus post discharge. Again, it's what we call presumptive criteria. So, and then engineering firms on behalf of the county or a developer have to go through an exercise to demonstrate that the pre-development discharge or the post-development discharge is less than the pre-development discharge. And generally speaking, you also try to demonstrate that it's the stages outside of that development, so to speak, are no higher than they were beforehand. Unfortunately, a lot of times when folks look at a project site, they're looking at just their project site, and they're ensuring that it is just on the boundary, and it's not always a larger regional model that they're evaluating it against. So we've worked with some communities who do that. They have a regional stormwater model, and then they're looking at the peak and stages. Not, the developer will go through that exercise to demonstrate that I got a permit and I got my pre versus post, but then local governments can go to an additional extent to look at the regional area and plug that in and make sure that there's no higher stages in the surrounding community. But again, this is not a water quality exercise, this is a flooding exercise, right?
Yes, but of course with flooding and standing water, that is also a pollution issue, essentially.
Yeah. One might argue, one might argue the more water you hold back, the better. The more flooding, that's
Well, and
creates more
again,
flooding, but.
the slower the drainage, the better, I understand.
Yes.
But again, just curious, is there somewhere that we can look at these specs as they develop new technologies? Is it open to the public? Is it engineer specific?
You're talking about some of the treatment trains that were,
Yes, all of those options that you said that engineers have access to, whether it's through that software or other government sites, is that something that the public can access and review?
well,
Yes.
certainly, I mean, and that's, I mean, you've seen many of them in place, I mean, but they are definitely different, and some of them are invisible, in some respects.
Of the Water Management District handbooks.
Well, you mean but I'm talking about some of the actual treatment trains are somewhat, can be invisible, like this swale or bioswale or something like that.
I didn't mean on site, I meant like plans-wise.
Plans-wise, well, yes. I mean, you'll see them, they're going to be, so much of this has been voluntary in the past, right? I mean, you have seen communities with low-impact development requirements who have helped encourage these sorts of things, but now it's going to become, you're going to see it in everyday plans and that are going to be coming out from, whether it's the county that's widening a road and having to do improvements to small, a CVS or whoever, little small commercial sites that are coming in will have these sorts of treatment trains that are going to have to put in place.
So I don't mean to pound this, but as a developer, if I want to go and look at my options, where can I access that list of options for what I can implement into my projects?
Within the statewide stormwater rule, there are some concepts within the BMP train software. There are types of technologies that technologies or treatment processes that they reference for achieving that. So I think through both the statewide stormwater rule, the FSA has quite Florida Stormwater Association has a great wealth of presentations on this topic that also will show and demonstrate some of those examples. So maybe starting there.
All right. Wow, see, deep conversation on stormwater. It goes to show you how important and multifaceted it really is. Okay, Mark, thank you for that. And I don't know, do you have a clone? Because it looks like we've got another presentation from Mark Nelson.
I think I've used up all my time. So.
Okay, so now we're going to hear.
So while Mark pulls up the next presentation, right, we wanted, Jones Edmonds was the consultant that was hired by the Water Management District to do their first feasibility study and then do this revised, and you can say this better, but I asked him personally while he was here doing that other presentation if he could, before doing that, give us sort of Stormwater 101. So we went a little deep for Stormwater 101, but I just want to thank you for making time for this.
Yeah. And so I got some of my presentation out of order, so my introduction to our firm is coming here. But so this is the Indian River Lagoon Stormwater Capture and Treatment Feasibility Study update. And, I have our, client, the Water Management District, Gretchen and Melissa with me today, who can also hopefully support me as the questions get deep. As I expect they to, as well as Dwayne DeFries with the IRL was very supportive of and a team member as part of this project. This project really spun out of, hold on. I guess a little bit about us. So Jones Edmonds, we're an environmental and infrastructure solution company, 6 offices here in Florida. We serve Brevard County, the St. Johns River Water Management District, City of Melbourne, communities throughout Florida, primarily focusing on, water, wastewater, stormwater related infrastructure projects. So back in 2017, the district engaged with us to do this Indian River Lagoon stormwater capture and treatment feasibility analysis. And so this project looked for large regional scale projects, we kind of set a bar, 25,000 pounds per year reduction or greater, as well as looking at alternative water supply and trying, a lot of those pictures you saw earlier of the historic drainage divide, of trying to take that and push that water back to the west. And so from that, we identified 9 projects, and the Crane Creek M1 Canal project spun out of that. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that project that's ongoing construction right now down off M1 and before it discharges into Crane Creek. But that project is pretty significant in terms of its load reduction. You should achieve roughly 24,000 pounds per year of nitrogen, total nitrogen, and 3,100 pounds of total phosphorus. Obviously, a lot of suspended solids as well. The concept behind that project is bottom right there. If you can see, that's a large operable weir that holds back water in the system. If you remember earlier, I showed like that M1 canal profile. Well, that's going to hold water back in that whole system several feet, and then it's pumped. It's hard for me to point, but then before it gets to I-95, there's a pump station that takes and pumps water out to a stormwater treatment area, and then that water is discharged ultimately up to the upper St. Johns River. So, a lot of infrastructure to essentially accomplish reestablishing that historic drainage basin divide and sending water back to the west. If you can imagine, just that's 7 million gallons a day of water that had been going out M1 Canal to Crane Creek that historically had gone to the west is what this project's all about. And so that operable weir there that's down by Evans Road is a pretty interesting animal to see, and those are the sorts of things. And the reason why we had to have something like that was so that, in part to ensure that there was going to be no adverse offsite impacts in terms of flooding to the community to the west, so that Obermeyer Weir essentially fails open and or down, and so then it kind of restores it back to where the historic drainage patterns were within that. But normally during dry conditions, it's in the up mode like that, and that water that's held back behind there is pumped to the west. So again, so as we talked about that with the district, we realized that we really, we set the bar so high, and those big projects like that project we just talked about, which was very difficult because of the 3 or 4 local government entities at least that we had to coordinate with as part of that project. We thought collectively that trying to focus on the sub 25,000 pound per year reduction projects would be there's a lot of those opportunities still out there, and we didn't want to we felt like those are a lot simpler to accomplish because of the scale of those projects and maybe less coordination. So project essentially we looked back at the previous study because we felt like there has been changes in technology and in land ownership and other things that we might want to revisit some of the projects from the previous study that stalled for various reasons and revisit some of those. So we found a couple projects within the previous study that we did some updates on. And then as we move forward, we sat and met with all the local governments, Brevard County, City of Melbourne, Indian River County, et cetera, and talked to a lot of those communities, Palm Bay was included, to understand what projects they may have and what projects they may want to potentially advance so that we weren't duplicating any efforts or going down a path that was a dead-end road because they had already talked or that land was preserved for some of the things. So then we prioritized, we screened those projects, brought about 30 projects, new project concepts forward. We then developed conceptual projects for those, where we developed about 8 new projects, and then we developed kind of a prioritization ranking for those and a final report. We used, to screen these projects, we kind of looked at the 90 or so primary outfalls into the lagoon and started to work backwards from those. upstream from all those primary discharges or outfalls into the lagoon. And then we really kind of try to focus on publicly owned lands as a real starting point to see where there was opportunities. So if you can imagine just screening and looking at and identifying parcels and all those publicly identified or owned parcels and going, oh, look at that parcel adjacent to this canal, that's 5 acres. Let's see, and then looking at the load estimation tools that were available to give us an idea of how much load was potentially there, and any water quality sampling data that would support it. And from that, we developed 30 projects with an estimated load reduction range. And these are the primary projects that came out of that, kind of moving from north to south. From the chain of lakes, Oak Alley, River Mouth, Crane Creek, C1 Canal, C1 and Satilli were the 2 projects that we updated from the previous study, and the Miko water management area improvements and the Fellsmere offline treatment projects. So those were the primary projects that we evaluated, or the top projects that we really we evaluate all of them, but those were the kind of the ones that really, the cream of the crop that came out of those. And then here's just kind of a table of those in terms of the potential load reductions for nitrogen and phosphorus and the rough order of magnitude capital costs for those projects. We went through, for each of those projects, then we went and developed an opinion of probable cost, not just for construction, but the life cycle cost estimates, because a lot of these, unfortunately, very few of these projects are just gravity flow. They have more intense operations, pumps or nutrient, like a BAM media or something like that. And so they just have higher O&M than a traditional wet detention system. And so with those 2 things, we kind of, and the load reductions, we developed a ranking matrix. So that's the life cycle cost spreadsheet, which you can't see. So then, here again is sort of some of the data that we used, and I apologize, it's hard to read, but maybe that's intentional. To help to establish a priority for those projects based upon the cost, the life cycle cost, and the load reductions that they achieve. And then we had to use some other information to support the prioritization of those projects. So, Terry, you want to speak to this one? Just kidding. This is an ongoing discussion and an important thing I felt like we needed to have, as part of this presentation. And one of the things that really helps move projects like this along and help move that $20 million, 23,000 pound per year M1 canal project forward was really the collaboration with local governments, getting buy-in. But then beyond that, the carrot being what's in it for me, and not that it's about that, but I mean, local governments, if they're going to participate, they want a piece of the pie. The piece of the pie being, these projects generate load reductions, and the state doesn't have a role, not a role, they don't have a credit or an allocation in the BMAP, right? And so, we've always felt like it's, that's a great carrot for local governments to get involved in these projects. Like this, the district's done a great job to help bring these projects forward as concepts, and then in some cases the district takes them all the way through design and then builds them, even like's happening with the the M1 canal, but that's got funding from a number of different entities to get it there. But then ultimately, who gets those 23,000 pounds per year? And so, for all these projects moving forward, I think local governments have to hopefully look at them and recognize not the challenges with the projects, but the opportunities, because it's going to the approach to, for example, septic to sewer, as we all know, is a great tool, but that's an order of magnitude more expensive than these regional stormwater projects. And so, getting local governments to the table through incentivizing the BMAP credits, I think is a great tool. So that kind of brings me to the end. We've been through our public stakeholder meetings. Now we've gotten to this point where we have a good set of projects, and the district's probably going to be having follow-up meetings with stakeholders to talk about those projects, to see if they could move the ball down the field a little bit further, and then get governing board feedback before we finalize the list, and then funding. So I think that is it.
All right. Oh, wonder what that alligator is thinking. All right. Thank you, Mark. Does anybody have more questions for Mark? We might have burned
District
out.
Project Manager can't be too shy back here either. Gretchen's here as well to help answer any questions.
Thank you. Yes, Lorraine.
Well, it's great. I'm hoping that these would be available to us in PDF form. Your slides, could they be?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That would be great. Also, I noticed so you looked at 90 outfalls.
Mm-hmm.
You selected 90 outfalls.
All
And-
primary larger outfalls to the
Okay.
lagoon. Mhm.
So the whole area of Cocoa, Rockledge, and the county
Mhm.
around and in the vicinity of where the Bright Line station will be built, none of that, I know there are major outfalls there, but none of that was looked at or considered for priority because it's just not enough. It doesn't generate enough.
And I know we've crossed this road a number of times as it relates to, as the further north we moved, and I'd have to almost go back to, if we went back to the previous presentation with that historic drainage basin divide, the challenge what happened, we have so much more opportunity for non-historic area that's draining from west to east. The further south we go, the further north we go, that drainage basin divide is much narrower, and there's less drainage.
More historic.
Yeah, the historic basin is
The ridge.
that ridge.
Okay.
Mhm. But we certainly looked hard in that area, and we have some projects that just weren't part of the top there, but there's some good projects to the north there as well.
I think the slide with the dots showed the divide.
Mhm.
We have, my name is Gretchen Kelly. I'm
Hi.
a project manager with the Bureau of District Projects and Construction. And, I worked with Jen's Edmonds team on this, reviewing this IRL feasibility study update. But we do have one project up in northern Brevard County. It's basically in Titusville in the Chain of Lakes area. We do have a project that we considered high priority or that we could prioritize for funding to retrofit that system and provide additional treatment there. But yes, to Mark's point, up in northern Brevard County, the watershed, I believe, most of that watershed along the mainland actually drains west to the upper St. Johns River Basin. It's kind of a skinny, narrow watershed that drains to the east to the IRL.
Right, that red line is really close to the blue water in the northern part of the county. It's not till you get to the southern part of the county that the red line, the edge of the watershed, has been, stretched way west to drain a bunch of area that historically did not go to the lagoon.
Okay, great. That answers my question.
All right. Bobby?
Yeah, I saw on the one side there, the south prong or the south fork of the St. Sebastian River. Did you do anything with the north prong? Because they're kind of different setups or like surroundings.
Mhm.
So I was just kind of,
Yeah,
I'd be curious to see a comparison maybe between.
So the district does have a somewhat regional stormwater park known as Miko Stormwater Park.
Yeah.
That discharges into the north prong of the St. Johns River, of the Indian River, or the north
Sebastian.
prong
Well,
of
it
the
goes into
Sebastian
Sebastian
River.
and then, yeah.
But basically, there's a big historical agricultural canal called Satilla Canal that drains into that north prong, which goes into this Sebastian River, and we have a treatment train of 2 stormwater ponds that treats water from that Satilla Canal before it discharges to the North Prong. And one of the projects that we have here that we identified that we could prioritize is this Mika water management area improvements, where again, we could, we own that property, so it would be easy enough for us to retrofit that system to provide additional treatment.
Thank you.
And that was sort of a traditional wet detention-like system.
It was a traditional wet
Wheeler
detention
Stormwater
system.
Park, yeah, I guess was.
Yeah, it was called at some point
Wheeler
Wheeler,
Stormwater Park.
yeah.
There's, with all of our properties and projects, there's 3 different names for, for it, so. But yes, it was, like I said, it was a retrofit project, constructed that project for, to be good stewards.
All right.
Good.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next presentation is Let's Talk About Seagrass. Strategies to improve seagrass messaging from Amy Durham-Shea. Hi, Amy.
Good morning, everyone. I am Amy Durham-Shea, and I am the Brevard Zoo's Conservation Learning Senior Manager of Interpretation and Guest Learning. And that's a lot of words. But basically what I do is I look at the messaging that we have, how we can make that more effective to have our guests be more knowledgeable about environmental issues, and then the big goal to increase their engagement in pro-environmental behaviors. And for this evaluation, I did this as part of my work at Oregon State University as a graduate student there to really focus in on seagrasses. Why seagrasses? Seagrasses are one of the least well-known coastal ecosystems. We can think of ecosystems like mangroves as kind of like the charismatic ecosystems of the coastal region, and people really don't know a lot about seagrasses. We also know that messaging about complex management concerns are extremely challenging. Things that are invisible, which you can classify seagrasses as, they're underwater, out of sight, out of mind, and have multifaceted reasons for the issues that they're facing can be extremely challenging. So seagrasses are a perfect area to focus in on. The good news is that along the Indian River Lagoon, we have a lot of what I'm going to call visitor centers. You can also think of them as informal science learning centers, places like zoos, aquariums, nature centers. And we know that when people visit these, it can change their knowledge, their attitudes about environmental issues, and it can also influence their intent, willingness, likelihood of taking action. We also know that within these centers, we can be much more strategic using something that we call framing. So when we intentionally emphasize or de-emphasize particular aspects of an issue, we can have better results with our messaging. So I did a 2-phase evaluation. One, the first stage, looking at what messaging is already out there in these visitor centers. There's a lot of people doing a lot of good work, so we're not starting from nowhere. And then how can we take that and make it better? So I went to 11 visitor centers along the Indian River Lagoon, and all of them mentioned seagrasses. And all of them mentioned quite a bit about seagrasses, except for one that just mentioned that there are seagrasses in the Indian River Lagoon. And most of them took a really wide lens approach. So they provided a lot of information about multiple ecosystem services, multiple causes of loss, multiple conservation actions that people can take. For example, the most common ecosystem service that was mentioned was the importance of seagrasses for fisheries, which is going to come in importance a little bit later in my study. 9 of the 10 facilities mentioned something about fisheries, and on average, facilities mentioned about 4 benefits of seagrass. However, the trade-off with a wide lens approach is that you lose some contextualization and some explanation. So in facilities, there would be mentions of things like carbon sequestration and nutrient cycling, which are quite complex ideas with no additional explanation of what that means. And we know that when that happens, people fill in holes of what they don't understand with what they think might happen. So that can definitely negatively impact our effectiveness in messaging. Another thing that really stood out to me was that there was a lack of consistency between facilities. We know that when people hear the same information multiple times, it's more likely that they're going to remember it and learn it. And if we're not working together and we're saying different things at different places, that can also negatively impact our overall ability. So with that knowledge, I then surveyed 137 Brevard Zoo guests who all resided in a county bordering the Indian River Lagoon. And I asked them about what they know about seagrass, what they believe about seagrass, and I pilot tested some of those strategic frames. So what was really interesting is that 50% of the people that I surveyed on a Likert scale agreed that they are knowledgeable about seagrass, but 88% believed that seagrasses are important. So there is this idea that they're important, but we don't really know why or what they do or what we can do about them. Participants highly value the role of seagrasses in supporting biodiversity and improving water quality. So I asked them in an open-ended way, why are seagrasses important? And the answers that I got most commonly were seagrasses are a food source. Manatees featured really prominently here. Followed by shelter, followed by general support of biodiversity, so just like it helps a lot of animals, things like that, and the support of water quality. Now, later in the survey, I took all of those ecosystem services that were mentioned by other facilities, and I asked people to pick the 3 most important ones, and the same trend appeared. So the number 1 answer was food source in some way. Improving water quality was also, again, in this section. Now, I also asked them what is the cause of seagrass loss? And again, an interesting trend appeared. There was this general idea that it had something to do with water quality, but within that bigger category, there was some variation. The number 1 response was pollution from pesticides, followed by pollution from herbicides, nutrient pollution, and stormwater runoff. Another really interesting thing about the support of biodiversity, when I asked them, are fisheries important, only 6% of participants said that's one of the reasons that they would protect seagrass. So each of my participants saw 1 messaging frame, and I looked at 3 ecosystem services provided by seagrass, fisheries, manatees, and shoreline protection. And I also looked at frames what we call gain and loss. So the gain is you benefit from doing something, and the loss is that you lose something from not doing something. And this is an interesting aspect in environmental messaging because generally gain frames are better, but that's not consistent across environmental issues. So I looked at them as gain versus loss, and loss frames tended to be more impactful. People responded that they were the loss of seagrass directly impacted them, that the information in the frame is relevant to them, that the frame makes them more likely to take action when viewing a loss gain versus a frame gain. But as you can see here, that was not consistent really across ecosystem services. So looking at them as fisheries versus manatees versus shoreline protection was much more informative. And what I found, consistent with what I found when I was just asking them open-ended questions, fisheries were the least impactful messaging frame. After viewing the fisheries gain frame, which was the worst overall, they were least likely to agree that the loss of seagrasses impacts them, that protecting seagrass is important to them, that the information is relevant to them, and that they are more likely to take conservation action to protect seagrasses. Shoreline protection frames, on the other hand, were some of the most impactful. So when we looked at them as a group, gain and loss put together, our visitors agreed that the information was relevant, that it made them more likely to take action, and that they learned something they did not know. And on an individual level, the loss frame had among the highest percentage of participants agreed that the information made them more likely to take action. And the gain frame also had some really strong points that protecting seagrass is important to them. As you can see here, 100% of people who saw this frame agreed after viewing it that protecting seagrass is important. Currently, only 6 of the 11 centers included any information about the role of seagrasses and shoreline stabilization, prevention of erosion, and 3 included information about the role of seagrasses in protection from storm. And manatees, they kind of landed in the middle with some really mixed results. People did not feel that they learned anything new from this messaging. And again, mixed results with, is it important? Does it directly impact you? So we know that definitely more testing is needed to find that most impactful messaging. But the good news is we know that people believe they're important, that they value seagrasses for biodiversity and water quality, and they're familiar with their importance for manatees, but maybe not so important for behavior change. I did not mention this much in the beginning, but I did also ask them which actions you would be most willing to take to conserve seagrass. And there was no consensus here. It was all over the place. And again, lost messages were generally more impactful, but shoreline protection frames are something that we should definitely consider more. So my recommendations for future messaging are to focus on explanations. Something that was missing and that I did not evaluate in my study is how can we fill in those holes so people understand the process and they know the appropriate actions to take? How can we work together to be more unified in the words and the approach that we're taking? And how can we, thinking about how we can reconsider the emphasis on things that people maybe don't value as much, like fisheries, and focus more on those aspects that they do value. Of course, there was lots of mixed reactions, so some additional testing does need to be done. And we also, thinking back to those, why was the what I'm willing to do kind of all over the place, there needs to be a deeper dive into that. There can be many barriers to adopting pro-environmental behaviors, so better understanding that as it relates to seagrass can be very important. All right, with that.
Thank you very much, Amy. Okay, anybody have any questions for Amy? Bobby?
Yeah.
And then Dr. Winter.
So where, I would have liked to seen a list of the sites, like where they're at, like.
Yeah, so
Look.
I did keep them anonymous. I just walked in and just what any person walking in off the street would see, no behind the scenes information, no VIP tours, anything like that. They were representative of all counties along the Indian River Lagoon. They represented governmental, nonprofit, for-profit, educational, like university kind of facilities. So really the broad range. And I visited all facilities that I found by Googling Nature Center, Indian River Lagoon, Zoo, Indian River Lagoon, Aquarium, as well as by county. So Nature Center, Brevard County, for example.
So where were they?
What are you asking?
He would like the list,
Yeah.
but maybe that's not.
That's not information that I would like to share, but I would be happy to if that was essential to you. Yeah.
A little bit, because, I mean, the cultural swath of our lagoon is also pretty significant.
Yes.
It's not just ecologically diverse, it's notably, even just between here and Sebastian.
Yes.
And then here in Fort Pierce and Fort Pierce to Jupiter.
Absolutely.
Very different groups of people.
Yes, and
as
I would
well.
say that in developing a unified messaging, that does need to be taken into account.
Yeah.
Does it need to be tailored by region, and how can we do that while still having a messaging plan that would help reinforce concepts across areas?
Yeah, and the, differences in information, I don't remember why I put that note. And also in your surveys, did you ask anything about their residency? Like,
The
where are they
only
from,
thing
or
I-
how long have they lived, or are they just a visitor to that area or location?
Yes, so the only thing I ask is, do you reside along a county that borders the Indian River Lagoon? And only those people were able to participate in the study. As a person who works in a zoo, I don't get the luxury of
Yeah.
filtering my audience. I have to have a message that appeals to the 500,000 people that enter our doors every year. And same thing with other similar facilities.
So could you ask on another one additionally, resident, and how long have you resided?
Absolutely,
Right.
could, yes.
To be, because that would be interesting to see how many, do we have people that have been here for a length of time? What is their knowledge? And do they visit any of these type of sites in the past or with any regularity? Because if they're still going and they don't know certain things, why are they going?
Well,
It would be,
one of the biggest challenges of my job is that people don't go to museums to learn things. So we have a lot of studies on why people go to places like nature centers and zoos and aquariums,
Yeah.
and learning stuff is at the very bottom of the list. It's normally things like they want to experience something new, they want to spend time with their family, maybe your aunt is in town, you gotta entertain
Yeah.
her for a week. So learning is not the goal, and so that's not what motivates people to go. The learning is just incidental, and that's why it's important that we are very intentional in the way that we do it, to kind of sneak in that learning as they're coming with
And-
other intentions.
is there any other places you would think you would like to do this survey aside from like these learning facilities?
Yeah, so I think that learning facilities present a unique audience. These are people who are, again, not there to learn, so not intentionally seeking out information about environmental issues. And so if you're looking at other venues, you might be looking at a very different audience. People who might be intentionally seeking out information might have very different messaging needs than people, just the general public, we'll call them, that enters these kinds of places.
Dr. Windsor and then Kimberly?
Yeah, and Bobby asked the two questions I was going to ask, and I'm going to ask them in a little bit different way, since I got the answer to that. How many, can you tell us how many centers you visited along the lagoons?
11.
Okay, so there were 11 centers. The other thing is, one of your recommendations is better explanations. And, I spent 40 years trying to explain things to people, and when I give them exams at the end of the semester, they don't understand anything. So, in 40 years, I didn't learn how to do it. So, is there something we can do in a survey mechanism to figure out if somebody's willing to learn something, without asking them, are you willing to learn something? Because that would turn them off instantly, I understand that. And I don't expect an answer right now, I'm just throwing this out there for future consideration. Somehow, there are just some people who don't want to learn anything. If you try to teach them something, they're going to go, I don't want to learn anything, I'm here to look at the otters. And so, those are my two question comments. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely true. And we like to think of our messaging approach as most people most of the time. So there are people that you're not going to reach, and that is perfectly fine. What you want to focus on is those people who might be open to learning something, even though that was not their main intention. And to your first question, there have been studies about ways to effectively explain complex environmental issues in ways that are clear. Things like tested metaphors that help people to understand, and also what we call explanatory chains, which is where you explain step by step how something occurs, even to the details that you might not think you need to go into, but that really clear up any kind of misconceptions that people have.
All right. All right, Kimberly, sorry, yes.
You said you visited 11 different locations, but you did all the surveys at the zoo, correct?
I did,
All
yes.
with visitors at the zoo. And then, did you and would you define fisheries per your study because you had the least response for that category? Did you define fishery to your survey takers? And would you define to us what fisheries in your study meant?
Yeah, so my study was very brief in the words. I will actually show you because luckily, this is the one that I have up here. So very simple. I did not use the word fisheries, that is technical language, right?
Okay.
So fish need seagrass. If we protect seagrasses, we help safeguard fish population. So very straightforward, not going into the details of recreational, commercial, any of that, just that seagrasses or fish need seagrass.
So fish in general, not
Yeah.
even fishing, just habitat more
just
related?
fish.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right, Eric?
Out of curiosity, in your messaging research, what kind of attitudes were you seeing towards manatees, particularly whether or not it was entirely their fault that we didn't have seagrass?
That is one of the reasons that I picked manatees. And I did have on my list of what are the threats to seagrass overgrazing from manatees. Only one person selected that. So other things that I found, again, people kind of knew that manatees need seagrass, but that did not correlate to wanting to do something about that. They did specifically say that seagrasses were important as a food source, so they knew that. But there's this really mismatch between, yeah, I know about it, but it's not personally relevant to me, and it doesn't motivate me to make a change.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Amy. All right. The next presentation is a case study of public attitudes and its impact on the conservation of the Indian River Lagoon watershed from Zanielle Wells. Good morning.
Morning. Hi, I'm Zanielle. I am presenting my undergraduate thesis from the University of Central Florida. Special shout out to those of you who may or may not have participated in my study. And also, if my thesis committee is watching or hearing about this, special shout out to Dr. Giacomo Baggio, my thesis chair, you've been wonderful, Dr. Richard Plate, and Dr. Jessica Blythe. And of course, every one of my friends and family who will be hearing about this. Thank you for your support. So I covered a case study of public attitudes and its impact on the conservation of the Indian River Lagoon watershed. So my main research question for the study was, how does the interrelation between public perception and sentiment toward sustainable development initiatives affect conservation and restoration in the Indian River Lagoon watershed? And then the sub-question led to, what is the distribution of policy impacts in the communities surrounding the Indian River Lagoon? So the goal of the study was just to figure out how does the management of the Indian River Lagoon make sense to the people who live there? So I had two hypotheses for each of my questions. So the first question matches with the first hypothesis, which is public perception and sentiment towards sustainable development initiatives in the Indian River Lagoon watershed significantly influence conservation and restoration initiatives. I did not want to specify if it would be positive or negative, because as we know, different cultural factors make it positive or negative depending on political affiliation, background, so on and so forth. And then my second hypothesis, which is for the sub-question, is it is expected that the distribution of policy impacts is centered on the coastal communities. As we know, people who live directly on the Indian River Lagoon probably have more chances to do something about it and care more about what's in their immediate backyard. Okay, so going into this study, I wanted to get a little bit of context to ask questions. So as we all know, the Indian River Lagoon is a complex socio-ecological system influenced by various factors. What I specifically did some research on is water governance, conservation and restoration, and public sentiment. For water government, the big things that I focused on were sustainability, justice, and environmental stewardship, which are very important to ensure long-term and effective resource management. For conservation and restoration, as we all know, ecological integrity is crucial for ecosystem health and resilience going forward. And then public sentiment, huge. Trust, transparency, and inclusivity foster cooperation and informed decision-making, whether it be an individual living in the watershed who's voting for the half-cent sales tax or the people who are making the decisions. Okay, where's my mouse? Okay, so to figure out the answers to my questions, I did 12 semi-structured interviews with managerial stakeholders who work in the government, academia, nonprofit, or non-governmental sectors. The interviews were analyzed using a causal layered analysis. So semi-structured interviews, if you're not familiar with it, I asked a mix of open-ended and closed-ended questions to see where the conversation went. I shared my research interest and research questions and kind of let the discussion go wherever the participant wanted. And I used the causal layered analysis, which is both like a framework and a tool to understanding research. So there's 4 main layers: the litany layer, sorry, I'm forgetting to breathe, the social causes layer, discourse worldview, and myth metaphor. Litany is just a general overview for the person who's not spending an entire year of their life trying to understand everything about the Indian River Lagoon. What do they know about it? Social causes are what makes the people think what they do, what goes into perspectives about it, so on and so forth. Discourse and worldview is a mix of unconscious and ideological assumptions that shape the issue as we know it. And then the myth and metaphor layer is kind of like the underlying what's going on base level of approaching the situation. So some of the limitations of my study is I had some lack of responsiveness from stakeholders, which is acceptable. Everyone's busy, has everything going on. And because of that, there was a limited amount of stakeholders interviewed. Also a lack of time and resources to interview everyone who lives here. And then a majority of the respondents were located in Brevard County. I didn't necessarily think this was a big problem, considering that a majority of the Indian River Lagoon is located in Brevard County. So going into my results, general overview, the Indian River Lagoon has some ongoing health issues, goes back more than a few decades, as we all know, and that's because of various things like developing the watershed because of population growth. And as we know, there's a bit of mixed understanding about what residents think with the lagoon, what causes the issues in the lagoon, so on and so forth. So with the social causes, it's a mix of social, political, and economic factors. So it boils down to people moving here, may or may not be familiar with it. They may or may not care about going out in nature. They may just want to come here to do their job and send their kids to a good school. Again, with political and economic factors and social, bit of a mixed bag here. Some people don't have the financial resources to either, one, have the ability to get educated in their free time. They may be prioritizing work and making ends meet. They may be aware of what they need to do, but may not have the capacity to go out and replace their lawn with a non-invasive, environmentally friendly option. And they may not even know where to begin because everything's so overwhelming for them. Okay, so with discourse and worldview, something that was mentioned throughout was emotional attachment to the environment, which increases stewardship and attachment. The 2 main generations that were talked about were the children in elementary, middle school, sometimes high school, and then residents in the watershed who are in retirement age. It was a bit of a mixed bag, again, with people who are young adults entering the workforce and at the peak of their workforce. So that's where children come in. Children are going to school, they're learning about the importance of the Indian River Lagoon, coming home and saying, hey mom, hey dad, here's what I learned today. I'm going to hold you guys accountable even though I don't even know what I'm doing. And then the older generations, they may have more time and resources available to go out and do an oyster restoration project. And then some myths and metaphors that came up. With politics in the South, is shaped by a bit of a distrust by government. And that looks different from different demographics. So for communities of color, it's more of a distrust of, okay, if I do something, am I going to be criminalized by the government? Are they going to threaten my livelihood versus white communities where they're like, oh, I don't necessarily want to listen to the government because I want to stick it to the man, or I just don't believe in someone watching over me because I should have the right to be myself. Very individualistic. Another thing that led to is some competitiveness. That looked different for different people. So for nonprofit and managerial stakeholders, it looked like a bit of competitiveness of, okay, we're all competing from funding from the same sources. We're trying to get people to volunteer with us. How are we going to make our messaging the most effective so people want to work with us and support us in our causes instead of X, Y, and Z? Something I believe was dog eat dog. And then that translates over to residents of, if you move to the lagoon, you have the nice background. I want to have the most pristine view, to have dinner parties, something of the sort, or I want to have really cool fishing get-togethers. And then you have a developer coming in and building another house, and that blocks your view. And then you're a little bit upset with that. So a little bit of weird with that, that I thought was interesting. Okay. So discussion. So, which was talked about briefly, so I'm very glad I get to go after you. There's some misconceptions in the watershed. Some people believe that there's just one issue that shapes it, whether it be the manatees eating all of the seagrass or everyone's toilet going directly to the lagoon, whether that may or may not be true. And so it boils down to, okay, so how are we going to effectively communicate with people? Something that I noticed in my discussions with my participants is that some people aren't even reached out to because of beliefs that they're not interested in what's going on because they have bigger fish to fry, whether that be rent, cost of living, their kids being in school. And so really trying to be intentional about reaching out to those communities to ensure that everyone is represented in the decision-making process. And with that leads to destigmatization of climate change. As we know, climate change has some negative impacts on the well-being and resilience of the Indian River Lagoon. The extent of that is yet to be determined because we're currently seeing how that plays out. With that, some people don't really understand the importance of acknowledging climate change and how that relates to sustainability. So being really intentional about how that is in education initiatives is really important. So in conclusion, collaborative efforts and community involvement are essential for effective Indian River Lagoon restoration, and that looks different across the watershed. So my hypothesis for the first question is generally supported because, as we know, we have a democratic process. People are able to vote for what they want. They're able to show up and talk. But that's with the caveat that some people have more capacity to do so, and some people may be completely left out and not even aware of it, so that should be fixed or improved however possible. And then my second hypothesis was supported. Even though people living farther away from the watershed are able to make an impact, they have more room for error per se, versus the people who live right on the lawn. If they accidentally dump all their fertilizers right there, and it's going to have an immediate impact. And they tend to care a lot more about what's going on in their backyard. Okay, thank you for your time. Any questions?
All right, thank you, Danielle. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
What was your degree again? Or where's your, yeah.
Oh, I got a degree in political science and sociology, and then I got a certificate in anthropology of global health.
Kimberly?
I just wanted to comment, fabulous presentation,
Thank
by
you.
the way, in charge on. But also, you mentioned somewhat people of color, and then your last hypothesis there referenced people that don't live directly on the watershed, directly. So I know recently, this past year, I had an opportunity to invite a couple of our educational groups that are at every event tabling for everything. Not county, by the way, I'll just disclaimer that. And it was more inland, but still Brevard County voters that are going to be up for that tax renewal that funds our board that we spend all of our efforts here doing everything about. And they had no interest. So just to reiterate your findings, even very much within that community, you also mentioned that competitive issue between organizations. So I was very disheartened by the fact, and I, in the past, have had my own organization with my kids. It was a high school project. It lasted 4 years. It's over. So I wasn't able to go out there and do that tabling myself. But just to really back up your findings being accurate and very precision-oriented with what you found, that was just a personal experience that I had right here. So definitely share your work with as many people as possible. An excellent job, and thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you, of course.
All right, thank you, Danielle.
Thank you.
All right.
Do you want me to close this out, or? Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the next thing we have is a video of Turkey Creek Offshore Oyster Restoration Project.
Yeah, so this is one of our projects that is furthest offshore. Normally we do the oyster restoration projects right close to shoreline. This one had to be accessed by boat. So also makes some challenges for filming too. So, but we'll let Logan roll it.
This project is a 12,000 square feet oyster habitat restoration project just outside of Turkey Creek. So we are using recycled oyster shells from local restaurant partners collected all throughout Brevard County, and oyster gabions, which is a galvanized steel wire mesh box filled with that recycled oyster shell, and locally sourced coquina rock to build oyster corrals. And these corrals help hold loose shell that oyster larvae will settle on and grow on and create oyster reef habitat.
This is our largest project constructed to date. The modules that are being constructed are 75 feet long and 20 feet wide. These are also the widest modules we've constructed for an oyster project, and it is our project that is furthest from shore. So we are testing lots of different variables here, including distance from shore and the different material types. The University of Central Florida will be monitoring this reef, and if shown successful, this will show us that we can use more natural-made materials like the coquina rock and reduce the amount of man-made materials we're using to construct these oyster reefs.
I like to say that oysters are a triple threat. So oysters help to improve water quality in the Indian River Lagoon. They help to remove nutrients through two different ways. They assimilate that nitrogen and phosphorus into their shells as they're growing. So the more oysters we can grow, the more nitrogen and phosphorus is uptaken in their shells as they're growing. And then they also remove nutrients through a special relationship that they have with bacteria that live underneath the reef that goes through a denitrification process. So that bacteria is helping to physically remove nitrogen from the water column, and it will bubble out of the lagoon as nitrogen gas. So it's removing it from the cycle, and if we can reduce the nitrogen and phosphorus in our lagoon, we can improve water clarity and quality. And finally, oyster reefs provide amazing habitat for our local wildlife, including fish and crabs and invertebrates.
In 2014, Brevard County Natural Resources and Brevard Zoo's Restore Our Shores program worked together to do the first oyster restoration project in Brevard County. And in 2017, with the Save Our Indian River Lagoon program, we were able to add additional funds and expand the reef program to stretch throughout Brevard County.
Brevard County is also helping to support many other projects that the Brevard Zoo's Restore Our Shores program is working on with the community, including our oyster and clam gardening programs, where we have volunteers who live along the lagoon that are helping to raise oysters and clams for our restoration projects. And they also help to support our seagrass nurseries. So we have two seagrass nurseries, one down in Melbourne Beach and one up in Rockledge, where we're growing seagrass to plant out in the Indian River Lagoon. Volunteers can visit our website at restoreourshores.org. We always have lots of different opportunities going on to help construct the oyster reef materials or actually get out in the lagoon with us and be hands-on on the projects.
The Restore Our Shores program uses lots of volunteers to help with these projects, and there are many other volunteer groups throughout the county that you can get involved with. If you go to brevardfl.gov/Save Our Lagoon, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter and hear about all the volunteer opportunities available.
Thank you, Brandon. Can you hear me okay? Yes,
Quick
comments.
comment on the Channel 6 News did a 3-hour live broadcast from Melbourne this week, and in that live news broadcast, they did a nice piece on Restore Our Shores, and so that video clip from there would make a nice advertising piece too. I think it goes for maybe a minute and a half or 2 minutes, something like that.
Take a look.
Where do you locally source coquina?
I don't know where they were getting it from.
Yeah, they're,
The zoo? No?
they're mines. I don't know.
Where you locally
But
source?
I know, Rock Solid Rock has local coquina, and there are multiple local providers.
I didn't know where it came from, I'm just curious. And the other thing, I saw a quick shot of a mesh plastic. Are you still using those, or was that old footage?
They phased those out. I think they still might utilize some of that when they're delivering the oyster spat to grow in those cages, but.
Okay, but yeah, I thought everything
yeah.
a lot was removed, like gone back and taken
Yeah,
out
that's-
from it.
yeah,
So if it was there, it would be like a temporary little, okay, just making sure.
Yeah, we only have so much B-roll of the oyster project since we've, it's been a recent switch.
Any other comments or questions? I'm not Vinny, I'm Barbara. But Vinny had to leave, so this is my first try at this. And I have to tell you, I grew those oysters, and it was really difficult to do. It was years ago when they first started doing that, so thank you for your presentation. Any other additional comments?
I love the use of the coquina, though. It's going back more natural, historical. That's what was on the shoreline, so.
That's great. I heard they're actually cloning the reefs now, and that we're going to get some rejuvenation of growth in that. Be great. Okay. Any other questions, concerns, or comments? Thank you very much. We'll open it up to old business. I don't think we have any. We're all new. New business? Nothing?
I just maybe got a quick comment, just
Go
because
ahead,
it's sort of
Bobby.
related. If you haven't seen yet, the Fish and Wildlife Commission for the state did make their announcement about, or partial announcement about the new amendment 2 for the constitutional right for hunting and fishing. And it says, they said there will be no change for, what was it specifically, on the net ban. I'm presuming they mean the gill net ban, but it just says there is no change for the net ban, and that's included in the Constitution as well, if that amendment does pass. So.
Thank you.
Does that mean they would still be illegal?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. No change in the ban.
Anything else there? And we'll open up to public comments. And Lou, would you like to come forward?
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me just pass these around. Here you go. Yeah, Lou Kontnick with the Brevard Indian River Lagoon Coalition. And what I'm passing around is an update on our coordinated communications plan, particularly the coordinated posting. And I think probably many of you are aware that we've done some surveys and found that a large portion of our community really doesn't know what's being done here today and generally with the funds. And so we've launched what we're calling this coordinated communications posting plan, which is doing posting with lots of different organizations. I can say that Laura Lee and Barbara are both involved in this, to go ahead and get a clear, consistent, concise communication that is true and floods the zone with information about the great work being done by the Sorrel and the other organizations, so that we build that awareness so that as we move forward, especially towards reauthorization, we have an engaged and informed community. What we're doing is doing posts, 2 posts a month, generally one sort of what is it, what are septics, for example, and then post number 2, and how are we making progress on it. So this is just an example of the post that's out there right now. We're following the Sorrel's topic calendar, and so this month the topic is septics. Next month it will be wastewater treatment, so we'll be getting those out. You can see that we're making some impact, you know, we're growing, not each and every time, but we're growing consistently. And so I wanted to make you aware, to invite you all to join Barbara and Laura Lee, and for that matter, Sorrel, the county, you know, the NEP, various different organizations in helping to go ahead and get that message out. Glad to share it with you. We're also looking for volunteers to help us go ahead and make this program easier and more robust. So with that, thank you very much. If you've got any questions, I'm glad to take them.
Thank you, Lou.
Okay.
Laura Lee?
I just want to comment on how easy it is to participate in this. I mean, it's like nothing. There's an example of one of the messages on the back of your page, and it's real simple and it's easy for people to understand. There's links, and it gets emailed out to your business twice a month, and you just put it on your social media channels. It's really, really easy. And I think it's interesting to see that Seagrass had the most impressions and reach, and it's interesting to see that the septic one that just went out last week had a really good reach. And one of the things that we've found that's most appreciated is the Sorrel brochure, the double-page thing that has all our projects. People love that. The more hands that we can get that into, the better it's going to be, because it really helps people understand what it is that we do. And we have a really good stash of them. So if you have a need or you want some of those brochures, let me know. My mother would like to get them out of her playroom. They're all up against the wall, so we'd like to move some of them out. Thank you.
I'll just add to the posting, because we post all the time for Lou, and all the comments have been really positive. I haven't had anyone say, remove me from this list, which I do get sometimes. Any other comments? Okay, we'll go on to the next person, who is Danny Straub. I hope I'm saying that right, Danny? Thank you.
Not a problem. My name's Danny Straub. I'm with the City of Melbourne Engineering Department. I missed the first part of the presentation this morning because I was dropping my son off at school. Sorry about that. So I do believe Terry let you guys know that we are going to not need the funding for the Cherry Street baffle box. We were extremely surprised at the cost of the construction that came in, and we had already have a grant through the state for some funding, and that's covering 99.9% of the construction costs. So, and we had already set aside some utility funds to cover any cost, because we figured this box, based upon our last box that was installed, would need additional funding. So while we thank you very much for giving us the funds, we don't need them this time around. However, I promise you will have more applications for more baffle boxes in the works. I'm working on those now. So hopefully we'll be able to fund some of those other projects. So thank you. But we're very excited not to have to need funds for this one. Very unusual. Very, very unusual.
Great, Danny. Any questions? Comments? Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Okay, our next one is Craig Wallace.
So we got the double whammy with the Indian River Lagoon Coalition here this morning. I got an opportunity for you. As you know, we tried and weren't successful in getting the extension of the soil program on the ballot this year. That may have been a good thing because, as we found out later, if we had done that, if we weren't successful, we wouldn't have an opportunity to redo it again in '26. So we have between now and 2026 to get this accomplished. And as you've heard from a lot of the communications here, we have some challenges in front of us in terms of addressing that 60% that don't really have a good idea of what's being done to fix the lagoon. So, so we had a meeting with, so two things. One, we're gonna have a new commission, right? So 3 new commissioners are going to be out there. We'll have to educate them. We'll have to bring them along so that they understand why they need to support this program going forward. So we met with Commissioner Feltner, and he is the one that suggested doing workshops. So he would like to do workshops. He doesn't have a specific plan in terms of exactly how that's going to occur. So I think we need to help him a bit. So I think this is the organization. We have 2 challenges. One is to get more people involved, more people understanding, you know, what is being done. We're always doing that, and the things that Lou is doing is helping that a lot. But I think engaging people in the process of determining what do we do after 2026, you know, getting people to say what they would like to do. There's a number of people we've heard express opinions. They come to this meeting, they ask for things, but I think we could expand that even further. So I'll throw this out there as an opportunity challenge to help us figure out how do we do those workshops. It could be here, or this could be part of it, but this is the part of the process of planning for the next phase of this program. And it's going to be really important that we get the public engaged in that process. So we're going to be working hard to try to do that, to try to get more engagement. We're going to be doing a lot more straight talks and that sort of thing going forward. But I think everybody in this room and the new people that are going to be joining this group should be engaged in that process. Because one of the things that Rob wanted to do was wait until the new commissioners were on board before he really initiated this process of you know, continuing the program on. So I'll just leave that with you, and Virginia and I will be having a lot of conversations on this topic going forward, but I think that will be an important process in the next 2 years, and that will be engaged the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Any comments for Craig or suggestions? Okay. Any other public comments?
I have a question.
Yes, Virginia.
Craig, sorry.
Question for you, Craig.
Yeah. These workshops, you said they could be here. Did you mean COC-led workshops rather than board, county commissioner-led workshops?
I'm going to leave that open to discussion, but I think because this is the Citizens Oversight Committee, you know, this is where people should be coming to give their input in terms of what we do going forward. So I think the objective of this isn't necessarily the commission's initiative. This is just something I'm throwing out there to you as the Oversight Committee. I think you could be part of that process, not necessarily the workshops that Rob is trying to get out there, because that's going to be county controlled and it's going to be done in a certain way, in a certain format. But I think if we help that process along by maybe expanding that, where this we can do a little bit more in terms of information gathering in this on a monthly basis, and maybe it's part of part of the program going forward, where we get people to try to participate more in terms, I mean, people we have here are great, but we're not getting that broad perspective of the public, and I think that needs to come through this Citizens Oversight Committee. I don't know if that answers your question or not. Thank you.
That's good. Thank you. Any other discussion? Any other public comments? I'll just ask the committee if you have any more input for us before we adjourn.
Well, maybe
Yes, Bobby?
Have you been in conversations with other commissioners or potential commissioners?
So this is a topic, anytime I meet with a candidate for the commission, we're talking to them about. As far as this process of gathering information, no. So Commissioner Feltner is the only one, and he's the one that recommended it to begin with, so that's kind of, we're starting with him, and we will definitely talk to the other commissioners about that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Shall we have a motion to adjourn?
No, I just
Oh,
want
you
to
haven't done it
make
yet.
an announcement.
Yes.
October 19th, Saturday, Merritt Island Wildlife Association will have their annual meeting and dinner. And we've had some great speakers in the past, including Terry and Vinny. But this year we have a nature photographer who focuses on Florida. And she's got a new book coming out, and it's about birds in Florida and how they look in Florida, because sometimes they look really different here than they do in their other parts where they migrate to. So anyways, it's for the fundraiser, we're the Friends Group for the Refuge. We don't have that many tickets left. It's at the Field Manor House in Merritt Island. I think it starts at 5:30. We have catered food. Tickets are $50? $40. $40. So if you're interested in that, please let me know or go on to miwa.org and you can buy the tickets from them. Thanks.
Thank you, Charles. Anyone else? Virginia?
I want to thank our speakers today. No, we normally have people that have been doing whatever, aspect we're looking at for decades. This time we had two college students, one graduate program, one undergraduate, and I just thought it was really neat to hear that younger perspective and, what's coming out of the schools these days. So thank you for entertaining those presentations, and hopefully it leads to more collaboration with the universities and with students.
It's wonderful. I'll just echo that. Thank you all very much. The meeting is adjourned. Have a great week.
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period.